What the hell is the maid doing teaching my son math? Calvin Royce barked from the doorway, his voice like a thunderclap splitting the silence in two. 7-year-old Elliot dropped the dry erase marker he was holding mid-equation. Maya William, the housemaid, blinked twice and slowly turned toward her employer. Mr. Royce, she stammered, forcing steadiness into her tone. He asked about a pattern problem. I was just showing him how to think it through. Calvin stepped farther into the room. His Italian shoes struck the floor like a judge's gavel. The polished lenses of his glasses caught the light as he surveyed the board rows of symbols and graphs far beyond what a second grader should understand. His jaw tightened. "You're a maid," he said sharply, "not a teacher. You're paid to clean this house, not fill my son's head with nonsense." With one sweeping motion, he shoved everything off the table, pencils, notebooks, a cup of water, sending them crashing to the floor. The glass shattered, water spreading across the polished wood like a small silver lake. Elliot jumped at the noise. Maya instinctively stepped back, hands trembling as she wiped a stray droplet from her apron. "I wasn't trying to overstep," she whispered. "He was curious, that's all." Nod. Before she could finish, another voice cut through the sharp, cold voice of Miss Fairchild, Elliot's private tutor. She stood in the corner with her arms folded, a look of pure disdain twisting her thin lips. "This," Miss Fairchild said icily, "is what happens when boundaries aren't respected. A maid, and a black one at that, lecturing a white child. This is not a daycare, it's a disgrace." Maya took a step back. Her spine remained straight, but something in her eyes darkened, not in fear, but in disappointment. "I didn't mean to cause offense," she said softly. "Elliot asked me to explain what the sequence meant. I only showed him how to break it down." Fairchild took 2 quick steps forward, and before anyone could react, her hand cracked against Maya's cheek with a sharp, echoing slap. Maya staggered slightly, one hand flying to her face. The sting was instant, the humiliation deeper. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The boy stared at her, horrified. Calvin froze, the air between them thick with tension. For a split second, even he seemed shocked by the violence that had erupted in his own home. "That's enough," he said finally, his voice low and tight. Miss Fairchild lowered her hand slowly, her eyes glinting with justification. "Wait, before we continue, if this story touched your heart, please hit subscribe. It truly encourages us to bring you more powerful stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know our amazing viewers around the world." "Then you handle it, Mr. Royce. But mark my words, if you let her near him again, people will talk." Maya turned toward Elliot. The child's eyes were wet, his chest rising and falling fast. "She makes math make sense, Dad," Elliot pleaded. "Please don't be mad at her. She just helps me." Calvin's expression didn't change. "Go to your room, Elliot." "Dad." "No." Elliot hesitated, then ran out, his sneakers pounding down the hallway. The echo faded, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Maya swallowed hard. Her cheek burned, her pride trembled, but her voice soft and steady broke the quiet. "I didn't mean any harm, sir. He only wanted to understand. I taught for years before this job. It's the only thing I still know how to do." Calvin's brow furrowed. "You taught?" "Yes," she said, lowering her eyes. "At Lincoln Middle School. I loved it. Until..." Her breath caught. The memory surged up before she could stop it. A dim classroom years ago. A room filled with children who laughed, who learned, who trusted her. And then the day she stood up for one of them, a boy named Darnell, 12 years old. Bright. Kind. Labeled disruptive. Because he asked too many questions. Maya had defended him. When the principal tried to suspend him for nothing more than being himself. "You people always make excuses for your kind," the principal had hissed. 2 weeks later, Maya was released for unprofessional conduct. Her credentials gone. Her savings drained. Her spirit fractured. The present came rushing back, the gleaming library, the scattered books, the billionaire glaring down at her like she was nothing. She blinked the memory away. "He just wanted to learn, Mr. Royce. That's all." Calvin turned away. "Enough. From now on, you stay in your lane. Leave the teaching to professionals. She nodded once. Yes, sir. When she bent to gather the fallen books, her fingers shook, but she made each stack perfectly straight. She felt Elliot's eyes in her memory, wide and eager, and the sound of that slap still ringing in her ears. When she left the room, she walked slowly, but with her head high. That night, the mansion fell silent except for the hum of rain outside. Calvin sat alone in his study, staring at the tablet that held the security footage from earlier that day. He told himself he just wanted to review what happened, but when he pressed play, his breath caught. There was Maya laughing softly as Elliot solved a problem, patient, gentle, encouraging. The boy's small face glowed with pride. He grinned when he got the answer right, and Maya clapped lightly, telling him, "See? You already had it in you." Calvin leaned closer. It wasn't a lesson. It was connection. He saw his son, his quiet, withdrawn, 2P. Only boy alive in a way he hadn't been for months, maybe years. The next morning he noticed it again. Elliot sat at breakfast, humming softly, recounting how he'd learned to find patterns in numbers. He laughed at his own jokes. He even asked Calvin if they could play chess later. The change was undeniable. His grades from school had improved that week too. The report emailed from the principal had come in just the night before. Highest math score he'd ever earned. Calvin stared at his son across the table, seeing joy where silence used to be, and for the first time in a long while, a small, unexpected ache rose in his chest, something like guilt or regret. He had shouted at the one person who had reached his boy. Maya entered quietly with a plate of pancakes. The red mark on her cheek had faded but not vanished. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and she immediately looked away. "Breakfast is ready, sir," she said. Calvin opened his mouth, then closed it. Words wouldn't come. When she left, Elliot looked up from his plate. "Dad, Maya's really nice, you know. She said math is like music. That's why I get it now." Calvin forced a smile, but it felt hollow. "Eat your breakfast, kiddo." After Elliot left for school, Calvin stayed behind at the table, staring at the untouched coffee cooling beside him. He replayed the scene in his head, the slap, the crash, the terror in Maya's eyes, and then the way his son had smiled that morning. For the first time in years, Calvin Royce wasn't thinking about profit margins or quarterly reports. He was thinking about a maid who taught his son something no one else had managed: confidence. He ran a hand over his face, the weight of his own anger pressing heavy against his ribs. He whispered into the empty kitchen, barely audible even to himself. Maybe I was the one who needed the lesson. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving streaks of sunlight crawling across the marble floor. But inside the Royce mansion, something else had begun to shift, something Calvin couldn't yet name, but that would change everything that followed. The morning sun crept in through the high arched windows of Calvin Royce's office, painting golden streaks across the dark wood floor. But the light did little to ease the weight sitting in his chest. He hadn't slept much. The images from the library kept returning: Maya's trembling hands, Elliot's pleading voice, and that deafening slap. Calvin sat behind his massive walnut desk, nursing a lukewarm coffee and avoiding the stack of pending contracts to his left. His finger hovered over the screen of his tablet, hesitating, then finally tapped the archive folder labeled Interior Surveillance, Library. The footage loaded. He pressed play. There they were, Maya and Elliot. She stood beside the whiteboard, her hair pinned neatly, sleeves rolled up, completely focused on the boy. Elliot looked at her with the kind of attention and affection he rarely showed anyone, especially not his official tutor, Miss Fairchild. Calvin leaned in. Maya didn't lecture. She didn't even teach in the traditional sense. She made the process feel like a game, like a secret treasure they were uncovering together. Her tone was warm, encouraging. "Now imagine if each of these numbers were stars," she told him. "You just need to find which one shines next." Elliot giggled. "Like constellations?" "Exactly," she smiled, but with logic instead of light. Calvin found himself smiling too. Only briefly. Then the scene shifted. His own angry voice erupted into the frame, his hands sweeping across the table. The slap. The fear. He paused the video. Shame sat with him like an old friend. He closed the tablet and pushed it aside, the silence around him thick with discomfort. He reached for his phone but stopped before dialing. What would he even say? Down the hall, Maya was moving quietly through the kitchen. She had already prepared lunch boxes, wiped down the counter, and restocked the fruit basket. Her cheek still throbbed faintly, but she carried on like nothing had happened. That was the thing about surviving people's tempers, you learn to keep moving. She heard soft footsteps behind her and turned. Elliot stood in the doorway, holding something in his hands, a folded piece of paper. I drew this for you, he said, walking closer. It's you and me, solving the star puzzle. Maya looked down at the drawing. 2 stick figures stood beneath a big, glowing whiteboard, surrounded by stars. One figure had brown skin and curly hair. The other, shorter one, held a marker. At the bottom, he'd written in shaky letters, Miss Maya is my math hero. Her throat tightened. Thank you, sweetie, she said, crouching down to hug him. That means more to me than you know. Men. From the hallway, Calvin watched the moment, unseen. Something shifted in him, a crack forming in the cold, impenetrable wall he'd spent years building. By mid-afternoon, if you're still here and enjoying the story, we'd love your support. Take a second to hit subscribe. It really means a lot. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He summoned Miss Fairchild to his office. She arrived with her usual rigid posture and expression of polite arrogance. Miss Fairchild, he began, about yesterday's incident. She raised her chin. Unfortunate, but necessary. That woman was clearly overstepping. You saw it yourself. I did, and I also saw you strike her. Fairchild didn't flinch. Discipline was warranted. You hired me to set academic structure. She undermined that. Calvin folded his hands on the desk. No. What I saw was a professional educator reacting violently to a child's positive learning experience, one that you failed to provide. Fairchild's smile faltered. I'm not terminating you yet, but from this point forward, you will keep your hands to yourself and refrain from interfering with household staff unless directed otherwise. Understood? Her lips thinned into a forced smile. Understood, Mr. Royce. After she left, Calvin sat back and exhaled. The conversation left a sour taste in his mouth. For the first time in years, he questioned his own household hierarchy. Maybe he hadn't been running a home, just a controlled system of function. No joy, no warmth. That evening during dinner, Elliot chatted nonstop. I showed the constellation puzzle to Ryan at school, he beamed. He didn't get it. But I think I can teach him if I use the story Miss Maya told. Calvin watched his son, his previously withdrawn, quiet son, smiling, animated, full of light. It felt like seeing spring after a brutal winter. Later that night, Calvin returned to the study and opened his laptop. He began researching Lincoln Middle School. It didn't take long to find the archived news. Veteran math teacher dismissed following conflict with administration. The story was vague, sanitized, but buried in an education forum, he found a thread. Maya William was the best math teacher my son ever had. She stood up for a kid with ADHD when no one else would. He sat back in his chair, the ache in his chest growing heavier. Maya had been someone once. More than someone, a mentor, a leader. She hadn't lost her calling. The world had just refused to let her keep it. The next morning, Calvin stood in the hallway as Maya passed by carrying a load of folded towels. She paused, unsure whether to make eye contact. I need a word, he said. She nodded silently and followed him into the sunroom. There was a pause. Then Calvin spoke, quieter than usual. I saw the footage. And the reports. I know about Lincoln. I didn't know. All of it. Maya looked down at her hands. You shouldn't have had to go through that, he said. Her eyes flicked up uncertain. I want to make something clear, he continued. You were out of line by taking on a role you weren't hired for, but I was more out of line for the way I handled it. She blinked, stunned. Are you apologizing, sir? He nodded once. I am. And I also want you to keep helping Elliot. Quietly. Informally. Just do what you've been doing. He's flourishing because of it. Maya said nothing for a long moment. Then she nodded. Yes, sir, thank you. As she left the room, Calvin called out, "One more thing." She turned. "Your work with him, it matters, more than I ever realized." For the first time since she arrived in the Royce mansion, Maya smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile of a housemaid. A real one. Gentle. Quiet. Strong. And Calvin, for the first time in a long while, smiled back. If you felt that moment too, hit the like button and drop your city in the comments. Someone nearby might be watching with you. A week had passed since Calvin Royce's unexpected apology. Maya had resumed her duties with quiet precision, cooking, cleaning, folding linens, but something had shifted. A subtle but undeniable change hovered in the mansion's air. Calvin no longer avoided her gaze. Elliot greeted her every morning with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Even the house seemed warmer, lighter, as if acknowledging the gentle restoration of balance. But Maya moved with caution. Every step she took near Elliot felt like walking a tightrope, careful not to overstep again, careful not to attract Miss Fairchild's ire. The woman had remained cold and silent since their last confrontation, her sharp glances saying what her lips no longer dared. Still, Elliot sought Maya out. After school, he'd wander into the kitchen while she prepared dinner and quiz her on riddles or challenge her to number games. She never initiated. Calvin's warning was clear, but she didn't turn him away either. How could she, when he needed this so badly? One evening, as Elliot sat at the island countertop balancing wooden number tiles, he looked up and asked, "Miss Maya, how do you know so much math if you don't teach anymore?" Maya paused, her hands deep in a mixing bowl. The question hit harder than expected. "I used to teach at a school," she said, stirring slowly. "A long time ago." "Why'd you stop?" She hesitated. "Sometimes, even when you're good at something, people don't want you doing it." "That's dumb," Elliot replied with the unfiltered honesty only children have. "They're missing out." Maya smiled faintly. "That's kind of you to say." From the adjoining room, Calvin heard every word. He was pretending to read a document, but his focus was elsewhere, on the way his son spoke now with such openness, the way Maya responded with gentleness and care. He watched Elliot carefully arrange the tiles into patterns, repeating phrases Maya had taught him. "Group by 3, find the shift. That's how you crack the code." Later that night, Calvin reviewed Elliot's recent progress reports. The change was undeniable. His math scores had risen sharply, but more than that, his teachers noted his increased participation, his improved attitude, his renewed confidence. "He volunteers to solve problems on the board now," one wrote. "Elliot is finally coming out of his shell." Calvin leaned back in his chair, the weight of those words settling in. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about belief. Something Maya had reignited in his son. Quietly, and without recognition, he closed the report and stared out the tall window of his study, the moonlight casting silver across the estate grounds. Memories drifted in his own childhood, the harsh voice of his father, the cold expectations. Success had come, yes, but at a cost. His house was beautiful, but it had been a lonely place until now. The next day, as Calvin made his way to the garage to leave for a business meeting, he caught sight of Maya in the garden with Elliot. They were kneeling in the dirt, arranging colored pebbles into number groups: 5s, 10s, 20s, turning math into a game of patterns and color. He paused at the door. "Miss William," he called. She stood quickly, brushing soil from her apron. "Yes, sir?" "Don't stop," he said. "Whatever it is you're doing, it's working." Maya blinked. "Thank you, sir." Elliot beamed. She said, "Math is like nature. You just have to know where to look." Calvin chuckled softly. "That's a new one." "IMS." On his drive into the city, he found himself thinking not about his upcoming board meeting, but about Maya, about Elliot, about how some people carried their brilliance quietly, so quietly the world mistook it for silence. That afternoon, Miss Fairchild entered the study, unannounced. "I assume you're aware the maid continues to overstep," she said without preamble. Calvin raised an eyebrow. "She's assisting Elliot in a way that's helping him thrive." "That's hardly overstepping." Miss Fairchild bristled. "It's unorthodox, unprofessional, and frankly, improper." "Improper?" Calvin repeated. "Because she's black? Or because she's a maid?" Fairchild faltered. "That's not what I meant." But it's what you implied. She pressed her lips together, eyes hard. This sets a precedent. If word gets out that you allow staff to what? Help my son succeed? Sir, I think we're done here, Miss Fairchild. Her eyes narrowed. You'll regret undermining your own educational system. The board. Thank you. That'll be all. She stormed out, heels clicking like accusations on the marble floor. Calvin exhaled slowly. He felt something crack, some old loyalty to formality and hierarchy breaking under the truth. Maya was doing what no hired expert had done. She was reaching his son's heart, not just his head. That night, Elliot crept into Maya's corner of the kitchen holding a folder. Can you check my homework? She hesitated. Does your dad know? He told me to keep doing what works. She opened the folder. His work was clean, correct, thoughtful. But more than that, it showed signs of his voice. He had added a doodle at the top. A sun. Labeled Maya's math light. She blinked back tears. You're doing great, Elliot. Really great. He grinned. That's because I have a secret teacher. From the hallway, Calvin stood quietly, arms crossed. Not a secret anymore, he thought. It was just past 8 a.m. when the first call came. Calvin Royce was in his home gym, sweat glistening on his brow, when his phone buzzed insistently from the bench beside him. He checked the caller ID, Stuart Ellis, a longtime business partner and board member of the Royce Foundation. He answered, Morning. Morning? You might want to brace yourself. Stuart's voice was unusually clipped. There's chatter going around. About your maid. Calvin wiped his face with a towel. Chatter? Parents from Eastgate Academy are whispering that your son is being tutored by one of the house staff, a former teacher. A black woman. Calvin's stomach tightened. So? Stuart snapped. You know how this city works, Cal. Old money, older ideas. They don't like the idea of help crossing the lines. Calvin walked to the window. Outside, Maya was helping Elliot zip up his backpack. Laughing softly. As he adjusted the crooked strap, she looked radiant in the morning light, her presence effortlessly grounding the boy. She's helping him, Calvin said firmly. His scores are up. His attitude's changed. I'm not stopping that because a few country club relics feel threatened. You don't need to make it political. Just discreet. Calvin hung up without replying. Later that day, Maya was dusting the library shelves when Miss Fairchild entered uninvited. You've made quite the impression, she said, her voice thick with poison. I hear parents are questioning Mr. Royce's decisions. A maid teaching his son? It's a scandal waiting to happen. Maya kept dusting, silent. Fairchild stepped closer. You'll never belong here. You know that, don't you? Maya turned to her slowly. I don't need to belong here. I just need to help that boy. Fairchild's mouth twitched. Don't mistake kindness for permanence. He'll tire of you eventually. They always do. Maya said nothing, but that evening, she quietly opened the small journal she kept beneath her bed. She flipped past pages filled with lesson ideas, childhood doodles Elliot had given her, notes of encouragement to herself when the days felt too heavy. And there, at the center, she wrote, They fear what they can't control. But I wasn't born to be controlled. Meanwhile, in his study, Calvin reviewed Elliot's latest assessments. The principal had written a note at the bottom. Elliot has become a quiet leader in the classroom. He encourages his peers and explains math concepts using metaphors well beyond his age. What changed? Calvin exhaled deeply. He opened his laptop and began drafting an email not to a school, not to a business partner, but to a former state superintendent of education he knew personally. Subject: requesting background check former teacher Maya William. He needed to know everything, not out of suspicion but because something inside him had shifted. If Maya had once been thrown out unfairly, he wanted to right that wrong. Quietly, without disrupting her dignity. 2 days later, he got the report. Maya had no criminal record. No academic misconduct. What she had was a glowing file of testimonials from former students and faculty, until a single incident flagged her for insubordination. The notes were vague. The boy involved? Expelled shortly after. The principal who terminated Maya retired quietly the next year amid rumors of discriminatory practices. Calvin read the report 3 times. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. Someone had buried her. Neatly, quietly, like so many others. He tapped his fingers on the desk. The world had failed Maya once. He wouldn't let it happen again under his roof. That weekend, he invited a few board members over for brunch, a soft public move, nothing unusual. Among them was Marcia Cole, a powerful woman with influence over Eastgate's parent network. After some polite conversation, Calvin brought up Elliot's progress. "He's really turned a corner," he said casually. "All thanks to Maya William, our housemaid. She used to be a math teacher, brilliant woman." Marcia blinked. "Your maid is tutoring him?" "She's more than a maid," he replied. "She's a mentor, and thanks to her, my son is thriving." Marcia glanced around, assessing whether this was a trap. But Calvin met her gaze, unflinching. "Wouldn't it be nice," he added smoothly, "if more children had access to someone like her, someone who actually cares?" Marcia sipped her mimosa, lips pursed thoughtfully. The next day, whispers shifted. Not silenced, but softened. People still talked, but now, a few were starting to ask, what if he's right? Back in the mansion, Elliot ran into the kitchen, holding a flyer from school. "Miss Maya, I got invited to the math club." She grinned, brushing flour off her hands. "That's amazing, Elliot. They want me to teach a game next week, the star pattern one." Maya crouched, cupping his face gently. "You're going to shine so bright, baby." From the hallway, Calvin watched again. But this time, he didn't feel like a distant observer. He felt invested, responsible, changed. That night, he made another decision. He drafted a scholarship proposal under the Royce Foundation's name, a new program, one aimed at funding training for minority educators wrongfully dismissed or unable to return to classrooms. And at the top of the proposal, he wrote, "Inspired by Maya William." Maya awoke to the smell of coffee and the low murmur of the morning news drifting from the kitchen television. Sunlight filtered through the half-drawn curtains of the guest room she'd come to call her own, a space tucked away at the far end of the mansion, modest yet peaceful. She rose slowly, smoothing the bedsheets with practiced care before tying her apron and heading into the day. She found Elliot already at the kitchen table, legs swinging beneath the chair as he scribbled notes into a small blue notebook. "Working on your math club ideas?" she asked, placing a bowl of sliced fruit in front of him. He nodded without looking up. "I want to show them the story puzzle. You know, the one about the treehouse code?" Maya smiled. "That's a good one. It's got mystery, numbers, and just enough mischief." From the other side of the table, Calvin sipped his coffee quietly. For once, he wasn't rushing. He had delayed his morning calls, choosing instead to watch his son, his happy, talking, dreaming son, and the woman who had brought that spark to life. He hadn't told Maya about the scholarship yet. Part of him feared that if he did, she'd retreat humble as she was. She rarely saw her worth the way others did. But the plan was already moving. The board was reviewing the draft, and legal counsel had given their preliminary thumbs up. Today, though, wasn't about plans. Today was about a simple truth. Things had changed. And change, he knew, always had a price. Just after lunch, the doorbell rang. Maya opened it to find a stranger standing on the front step, a white woman, maybe in her late 50s, sharply dressed, her jaw tight with purpose. "Is Mr. Royce in?" she asked curtly. "I can check. May I ask who's calling?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "A concerned mother from Eastgate. He'll know why." Maya hesitated, then led her to the sitting room. Moments later, Calvin entered. "Mrs. Dandridge," he said, recognizing her immediately. She was on the board of Eastgate Academy. Her family name was Old Money. Her voice carried weight in certain circles, and today, that weight was coming down hard. "I'm going to be blunt," she said. "There's a stir among the parents. They're concerned that your son is being tutored by your housemaid." Calvin sat down slowly. Maya William was a licensed teacher. She's helping Elliot, and it's working. You're blurring lines, Calvin. A maid teaching a white child, that's not how things are done." He raised an eyebrow. "Not how things used to be done." She leaned in. "You're inviting scandal. Elliot's name will be whispered about. And so will yours. These families, you know them. They don't forget. Calvin's tone cooled. I used to care about their memory, but I care more about my son's future. Mrs. Dandridge stood abruptly. Just remember who your friends are, Calvin, and who you'll lose. When she left, Calvin remained seated for a long time, staring into the empty space where she had stood. The shadows stretched across the room as the sun shifted, long and jagged like the silence that followed. That evening, he shared the incident with Maya. I didn't mean to cause trouble, she said, voice low. You didn't, he replied firmly. They're uncomfortable because you're doing what they couldn't reaching my son, but they see me as a threat. Calvin looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Then let them be threatened. Let the ones who kept quiet while children fell through the cracks feel what it's like to be exposed. He hesitated, then finally handed her the scholarship proposal. She read the heading. Her hands trembled. You're starting a fund? For teachers like you, those the system cast out. I want the world to know your name and others like yours. Maya blinked fast. I don't know what to say. Just say yes. I'm not used to being seen like this. Not for what I am, just for what people assume. He stepped closer, not touching her, but anchoring his voice. Well, I see you. Elliot sees you. That's where change starts. That night, Maya stood in her room holding the proposal in her hands. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman still dressed in modest black and white. But something behind her eyes had shifted, no longer just enduring, but choosing. She opened her journal and added a single line. This house may not be mine, but today, my purpose walked taller than their power. The next day at school, Elliot's math club presentation was a hit. Parents clapped politely, but teachers praised his clarity and creativity. Maya had given him the confidence, and it showed. One teacher pulled Calvin aside afterward. He's gifted, she said. He needs more than worksheets. Whoever's been working with him, keep them close. I plan to, Calvin replied, but not everyone clapped. Mrs. Dandridge stood near the exit, arms folded, lips pursed, watching Maya from across the room. Later that evening, Maya found a note slipped under her door. No name, just 6 words scribbled in a rushed hand. Know your place before we remind you. Her hands trembled. She folded the note, tucked it into her journal, and wrote beneath it. If I'm shaking, it's only because the ground is finally shifting. Maya stood in the kitchen with a wooden spoon in one hand and a pot of stew gently simmering before her, but her mind was elsewhere. The anonymous note from the night before still sat folded in her apron pocket, like a stone pressing into her side. She had told no one. Not yet. The kitchen buzzed with its usual morning rhythm, Elliot munching cereal at the table, humming a tune she didn't recognize, while the housekeeper, Maria, moved through with arms full of fresh linens. To an outsider, the Royce household was peaceful, structured, perfect, but Maya felt it the shift, the growing discomfort that came from being both needed and resented. She stirred the pot once more and turned off the heat just as Calvin entered the kitchen. Morning, he greeted, voice rough from sleep. Good morning, sir, she replied automatically, with a small nod. Elliot beamed at his father. Dad, guess what? My teacher let me help another kid with fractions yesterday. Man, that's great, kiddo, Calvin smiled, mussing his son's hair. You're turning into a regular math coach. Elliot turned to Maya, eyes wide. Maybe we could start a team, like a puzzle club. Maya smiled back, though a flicker of worry passed through her. She wasn't sure how much longer the peace would last. After breakfast, as the house quieted and Elliot headed to school, Calvin lingered. You seem off today, he said. Maya hesitated, her hand subconsciously drifting toward her apron pocket, but she shook her head. Just tired, that's all. Calvin studied her face for a moment, then nodded. All right, but if anything's wrong, really wrong, I hope you'll tell me. She offered a faint smile. Thank you, sir. That afternoon, Calvin sat in a board meeting at Royce Industries headquarters, struggling to concentrate. The numbers being projected on the screen meant little to him, compared to the worry clinging to Maya's face that morning. She was composed, as always, but something in her eyes had changed. After the meeting, as he exited the building, he was approached by one of his board members, Jonathan Hargrove, a slick-haired, old-school type with a family name more valuable than his business acumen. You're becoming quite the topic of conversation, Calvin, Jonathan drawled. People are saying you've gone soft. Calvin kept walking. I didn't realize empathy was a flaw. Jonathan matched his stride. They're not talking about empathy. They're talking about her. Calvin stopped. Say her name. Jonathan blinked. Excuse me? Say her name, Jonathan. You've whispered it around tables, gossiped about her behind my back. But if you're going to speak to me, say it. Jonathan frowned. Maya William. The maid. The tutor. The charity case. Calvin's eyes narrowed. She's none of those things. She's the reason my son can smile again. She's the only reason he doesn't dread school. You'd know that if you ever got close enough to someone who didn't benefit your portfolio. Jonathan's lip curled. Watch yourself, Royce. You can afford to make enemies in the market, but not in society. Calvin leaned in. I built my fortune without society's help. I can survive without its approval. That evening, Maya sat in her room, rereading the threatening note. She considered tossing it, but something told her it was smarter to keep it. Document everything, quietly, just in case. Later, when she went to tidy the library, she found a new addition to the shelf, a small box with her name on it. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a simple necklace, a silver pendant shaped like an infinity symbol, with a tiny engraving. Keep teaching. No note, no card. But she knew who it was from. She placed a hand over her heart. The kindness stunned her more than the threat ever could. The next morning, Calvin met her by the kitchen window as she prepared tea. I want to ask you something, he said. She turned. I've been thinking about expanding the scholarship program. I want you to help lead it. Her eyes widened. Me? Yes, you'd guide it. Find the teachers who deserve a second chance. Mentor them. I don't know what to say. Say yes. But people already hate that I exist in this house. If I take this step, I'm not just teaching Elliot. I'll become their target. You already are, he said gently. The difference is this time, I'll stand beside you. Maya looked away, her eyes moist. It's not just about standing beside me. It's about what you'll lose. Calvin sighed. Then let me lose it. What I've gained is worth more. Later that day, while Elliot was at school and the house was quiet, Maya walked the garden paths alone. Autumn had crept in, turning the leaves amber and gold. She paused beneath the old elm tree, remembering her grandmother's voice from childhood. When people fear your light, baby, it's because they've only ever known shadows. She closed her eyes and let the breeze wash over her. The wind carried change. It always did. Just then, her phone buzzed. A message. No name. They won't protect you forever. Watch your step. She stood still for a long moment. Then, calmly, she took a photo of the screen and saved it. Back inside, she found Calvin in the study. I think we need to talk, she said. He looked up from his paperwork. I'm listening. I've been threatened. Twice now. His eyes darkened. She placed the note on his desk and showed him the photo of the message. His voice was quiet, but firm. You're not alone anymore, Maya. I promise you that. That night, security cameras were upgraded. Locks changed. Protocols tightened. The storm hadn't come yet, but the Royce mansion had begun to brace. Rain swept against the mansion windows with steady rhythm that night, more whisper than roar, but enough to stir unease in every creak of the walls. Calvin stood at the edge of Elliot's room, watching his son sleep, his small chest rising and falling beneath a blanket patterned with stars. It was nearly midnight, but Calvin hadn't closed his eyes once. Down the hall, a team of security technicians was still finalizing new surveillance lines, extra motion detectors, reinforced perimeter alerts. After Maya showed him the second threat, something in him snapped. This wasn't just gossip or disapproval. This was targeted, fear-mongering cowardice, masquerading as social preservation. He wouldn't let it stand. Meanwhile, in her small room on the lower floor, Maya stared at the ceiling, arms folded over her chest, the silver pendant still around her neck. Despite the security upgrades, a chill nestled in her bones. She wasn't afraid of the threats, not exactly. She'd endured worse in silence. But what frightened her was the idea that all this might collapse, that Elliot might lose the joy she had only just helped him rediscover. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. She opened the door to find Maria, the housekeeper, holding a folded blanket and a mug of warm chamomile. Thought you might need something to help you sleep, the woman said with a kind smile. Maya accepted the tea with quiet gratitude. Thank you. Maria lingered. You're good for this house, Maya. Some of us see it, even if others pretend not to. Maya's voice trembled slightly. I'm not trying to start trouble. I know. Trouble always finds the ones who heal. It's scared of losing control. Maya nodded, blinking quickly. Thanks, Maria. After she left, Maya sat by her window, the scent of chamomile rising with the rain, and wrote another entry in her journal. The ones who whisper behind curtains forget that windows open. The following day began with tension. Calvin arrived downstairs to find Maya already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Her movements precise but quieter than usual. Elliot burst in soon after, chattering about the math club's next challenge, unaware of the storm cloud hovering just above the calm. But even as Maya helped him solve a pattern puzzle on his toast with strawberry jelly and banana slices, her smile was slower to arrive. Mid-morning, Calvin received an unmarked envelope delivered to the estate gate. Inside, a black and white photo. Blurry, grainy, but unmistakable, it showed Maya entering the school building the day she'd gone to speak with Elliot's math teacher. Someone had followed her. On the back of the photo, in red ink, "Your choices have consequences. So does hers." Calvin's jaw tightened. He placed the photo on his desk and picked up the phone. Within the hour, Royce Industries' legal counsel arrived with a private investigator. "This is stalking," the lawyer confirmed, "and harassment, if we can link the source. We'll keep this out of the press for now, but I advise you prepare for a possible legal storm." Calvin's reply was calm but edged in steel. "Let it come. I'm done hiding decency. To protect the powerful." By that evening, the mansion felt like a fortress, and Maya quietly, carefully began preparing herself for a war she hadn't signed up for, but could no longer avoid. She was arranging books in the library when Calvin entered. "You've seen the photo?" he asked. She nodded. "Do you want to leave?" he asked, his tone softer than she expected. "We could get you a place off-site, protected, quiet." Maya paused. "If I leave, they win, and Elliot loses." He stepped closer. "You shouldn't have to make that trade." She met his gaze. "It's not about what I should have to do. It's about what I choose to do." Calvin studied her for a long moment. "Then we fight. Together." Maya's expression faltered just slightly. She had never had anyone say that and mean it. 2 days later, news broke online. A small local blog, buried deep in the education world, published a glowing story. Fired but not forgotten, the former teacher who's quietly changing one child's life. No names, no addresses, but the implication was clear. Within hours, it was picked up by a mid-sized news outlet, then a larger one. By the next morning, Maya's story, anonymous as it was, had gone viral under the hashtag #TeachWithoutPermission. Comments poured in. Support. Questions. Outrage. Familiar pain from other dismissed educators. A groundswell was building. Calvin stood by the window that morning, phone in hand, watching it all unfold in real time. When Maya entered with Elliot's snack tray, he held up the screen. "They know," he said. "But they're not all angry." Maya's brows furrowed as she read the article. "I didn't want attention," she whispered. "You didn't seek it. You earned it." And for the first time, she believed it. That evening, as Elliot drifted to sleep beside a stack of math riddles and comic books, Maya sat outside on the back porch. Calvin joined her in silence. The sky was clear, for now, but the ground beneath them was shifting publicly, politically, personally. "Do you regret letting it come this far?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then, "No, I regret that it took this long." She glanced at him, surprised. "I built my world around power," he said, "but power doesn't teach a child to smile. You did. And then, not as a billionaire, not as a man with a mansion and influence, but as a father," he added quietly. "Thank you, Maya." She didn't answer. She just reached over and touched the infinity pendant gently, the silver warm against her chest. The storm hadn't ended. But now, she wasn't weathering it alone. The morning sun filtered through gauzy curtains, painting the Royce mansion in golden streaks, but the warmth it offered was deceptive. A new kind of chill had begun to settle, not in the air, but in the quiet unease that comes when truth starts surfacing faster than those in power can bury it. Maya moved through the house as usual, preparing breakfast, checking Elliot's backpack, wiping down surfaces. Yet something about today felt different, too quiet, too expectant, like a held breath waiting for a scream. She wasn't wrong. Shortly after 10 a.m., as she was folding laundry in the guest corridor, Maria, the housekeeper, poked her head into the room, eyes wide. "Maya, there's someone at the front gate. He says he's from your past." Maya froze, a half-folded towel suspended in her hands. "Who?" "He wouldn't give a name, just said, you used to teach him." "Lie." The words hit like a stone to the chest. By the time she reached the gate camera screen, Calvin was already standing there, arms folded, watching the monitor with quiet intensity. On the screen stood a tall man, maybe late 20s, with a clean-cut jacket and faded jeans. His eyes scanned the camera calmly, but his foot tapped nervously against the stone path. "He says you were his favorite teacher," Calvin said softly, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Want me to turn him away?" Maya studied the face. It had changed with time, but the eyes remained the same. "No," she said, "let him in." Damon Harris had been 13 when Maya last saw him, an angry, gifted kid who used sarcasm to shield a wounded heart. Now, he stood in the Royce foyer, taller, broader, with a journalist's satchel slung across his shoulder. "I didn't come to cause problems," Damon said. "I just needed to say something to you before the rest of the world tries to say it for me." Maya nodded slowly. "You're a reporter now." He chuckled. "Of course you remember. You always remembered our dreams. I kept mine. Just barely." Calvin remained a step behind, observing quietly but ready to step in if needed. "I've been following the story," Damon continued. "The anonymous profile that went viral? I knew it was you. I recognized the phrasing. You used to say the same thing in class. Don't memorize the formula, understand the why." Maya gave a small, incredulous laugh. "You remembered that?" "I remembered everything," he said, suddenly serious. "Especially the day you stood between me and the principal after I called out that coach. You didn't back down. You lost your job. And you got expelled anyway," she said, the guilt still buried in her voice. "Yeah," Damon nodded. "But you taught me something nobody else ever had. You taught me that I was worth defending." He reached into his bag and pulled out a press badge and an envelope. "I want to run your story, not the sanitized one, the real one, about what happened, why you were fired, what you've done since." Maya stared at the envelope, unmoving. "I know you didn't ask for this attention," he continued, "but this time, we control the narrative. We write it with truth." Behind her, Calvin spoke for the first time. "You don't have to decide now. We'll support whatever choice you make." Maya looked at Damon, then at Calvin, then down at her hands once calloused from chalk dust, now softened by years of invisible labor. "I'll think about it," she said at last. Damon smiled. "That's all I came for." Before leaving, he turned back at the door. "Miss William, you're still the best teacher I've ever had. The world just needs to know it now." "Do." That night, after Elliot had gone to bed, Maya sat by the fireplace, the unopened envelope still clutched in her hand. Calvin entered the room quietly and sat across from her. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm not sure," she replied honestly. He leaned forward. "If you tell your story, things may change, but they'll also get louder." "I know, but if you don't," he continued, "they'll fill in the blanks themselves." She looked into the fire. "I'm tired of being quiet." "Then don't be." "No." Maya opened the envelope. Inside was Damon's draft article. The first lines read, "Once silenced by the system, she now teaches without permission and her silence ends here." She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she nodded. "Let them hear me." 2 days later, the full story went live. Damon's article swept through education blogs, civil rights forums, and teaching networks. The truth was raw: how Maya was pushed out for challenging discrimination, how she rebuilt her life piece by piece, how she found purpose again through a little boy who reminded her what brilliance looked like when it was nurtured, not judged. The article ended with a photo, Elliot holding a handmade sign that read, "Miss Maya makes me believe." Within hours, Maya's inbox flooded messages from teachers, parents, students. Some shared thanks. Others, their own pain. Some asked how they could help, and some still sent hate. But the hate no longer owned the conversation. That evening, Calvin walked into the kitchen where Maya stood quietly, her phone glowing with notification after notification. He held out a small package. Inside, a nameplate. Maya William, Director, Royce Foundation Educator Renewal Program. Maya gasped. "You're giving me the role?" "I'm offering it," he corrected. "But I already printed the plaque because I knew your answer." "One." She laughed a real, full laugh for the first time in weeks. "I accept." He smiled. "Then let's get to work." Outside, the wind picked up again, but Maya no longer heard it as threat. She heard it as momentum. The news hadn't just reached the city. It had echoed into boardrooms. In the days following the release of Damon's article, the Royce Foundation's headquarters received hundreds of emails. Most were supportive alumni, educators, journalists, even strangers praising the boldness of Maya Williams' story and the man backing her. But not all of them were kind. Calvin Royce sat in his corner office on the 29th floor, skyline stretching beyond the tall glass windows, his phone blinking with missed calls. A stack of printed emails lay in front of him, each one carefully reviewed by his assistant. "Calvin," Stuart Ellis's voice came through the speakerphone with corporate caution. "We've got a situation brewing with donors. 2 major sponsors have threatened to pull their contributions unless the foundation distances itself from Maya William." Calvin leaned back in his chair, jaw tense. "Why?" "They're calling her divisive. They say you're politicizing education, that you're turning the foundation into a personal redemption arc." Calvin exhaled slowly. "Is that what they think this is?" "They don't care what it is," Stuart said. "They care about optics. Their country club friends are uncomfortable. You're pushing on race, on privilege, on injustice, and they don't want their names tied to it." Calvin stood, walking to the window. "You know what's ironic?" he said. "The foundation was created to fund change. But the moment it threatens comfort, they treat it like an infection." Stuart sighed. "We need a strategy. You're either going to lose funding or you go on camera, say a few safe things, pivot the story back to your son's improvement." "No," Calvin said, firm. "Cal," I said no. He turned from the window. "We don't sanitize truth to protect status quo donors. Let them walk." There was a pause. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure." Back at the mansion, Maya was organizing the first framework for the scholarship program. The dining room table had become her temporary office, laptop open, files spread out, a calendar filled with names of displaced educators and potential outreach partners. Elliot sat across from her, coloring. "You're going to help a lot of teachers, huh?" he asked. Maya looked up, smiling. "That's the plan, baby. Even the ones who were fired for dumb reasons? Especially those ones." He grinned, then went back to coloring. "I'm going to draw you a badge, so they know you're the boss." She laughed. "Thank you, sir. Make it official." A moment later, Maria passed by the table, placing a plate of sliced apples down with a wink. "You've turned this house into a school," she said warmly. "I like it." Maya nodded, the warmth in her chest swelling. This house had become something different, less sterile, more alive. Even with the storm overhead, the ground beneath her felt firmer. But the pressure wasn't only external. That evening, Calvin received a private message on his secure server. It was from a restricted address. Subject: Proof. Attached: a zip file titled MW Records, unsealed. He hesitated. Click. Inside were 2 PDFs, personnel records. A suppressed document from the district Maya had taught in. One showed her internal evaluations stellar. The second, hidden deep in HR logs, was a scanned memo from the principal who had fired her. "Miss William is capable, intelligent, and if I'm being honest, intimidating to the wrong parents. She won't last here if she keeps pushing back." The date was 7 years ago. Calvin forwarded the file to his lawyer with a single line. "Tell me what I can do." He didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, he asked Maya to join him on the back patio. She noticed the change in his demeanor right away. "There's something I need to show you," he said, handing her the tablet. She read the memo. The words cut through her, even though she'd always suspected the truth. Seeing it laid bare, in the handwriting of the man who destroyed her career, made her feel both vindicated and violated. "I want to sue," Calvin said. With your permission, I'll fund it. We can expose this. Maya stared at him, then shook her head. No, she said softly. No, I don't want a courtroom battle. Not yet. The story's already out, and the more we focus forward, the less power they have over me. But they wronged you. They did, she said, but I'm not here to win back a title. I'm here to build something bigger than what they took from me. Calvin nodded slowly. You amaze me. She smiled faintly. You still say that like it surprises you. By the weekend, a feature segment had aired on national television. A female anchor interviewed Damon Harris, who spoke passionately about the quiet strength of his former teacher. She didn't yell. She didn't fight with fists, he said. She fought with patience, with knowledge, with resilience. And that's why they feared her. The segment ended with a soft piano playing over footage of Elliot and Maya in the garden, building a geometry puzzle out of stones. The hashtag number Teach Without Permission trended again. And while some in the elite circles whispered and retreated, others stepped forward. Donations smaller but more sincere began to flow in. Teachers offered to volunteer. Retired principals reached out. Former students from all across the state emailed, saying, I remember her. She changed me too. One message stood out. Maya opened it alone in her room that night. You saved me when I didn't know I needed saving. I hope this time, someone saves you. My. She stared at the screen, tears threatening at the edges of her eyes. But then, a smile.